We're so happy everybody's here and welcome. My name is Erin Reed and I am the marketing lead for Polaris MEP. Polaris MEP is the state's manufacturing extension partnership, which means that we are a nonprofit. And what we do is we offer customized and affordable solutions that help smaller manufacturers with their top line, their bottom line, and their pipeline. And one thing that really affects all three of those things is energy. Right? So if you're looking at that top line, more of your buyers are prioritizing sustainability. I heard a great speaker from Oshkosh, the big truck maker, talk about how they are now grading their suppliers on sustainability. And so this could really affect your contracts and therefore your top line impact. Rising energy costs, of course, affect our bottom line every day. I know it's something that you all are looking at ways to manage those. And it's also something that can affect your pipeline because if your workers are uncomfortable, that could lead to higher turnover. And for younger candidates, they, like your buyers, are prioritizing sustainability. So they may reject your facility, your company, if they don't feel like you're making enough effort to go green. And because we're a manufacturing extension partnership, that's why we've extended our knowledge base today and invited Claire Kokoska of Rise Engineering and John DeRocher of onsemi to join us. And they're going to introduce us to some new projects for green that will help you with all three of those areas that I just mentioned. And they'll help us learn about some funding options that make those projects possible for smaller Rhode Island manufacturers. So Claire Kokoska with Rise Engineering works with businesses, municipalities, and more, primarily in Rhode Island and Mass. In fact, despite her beautiful background on her Zoom today, she's actually got some beautiful snow falling behind her in Massachusetts. And she works with them to help further their clean energy and efficiency project goals. And especially part of that is helping navigate grant funding, incentives, tax advantages that help fund those projects. And John, I'm thrilled to say, is with our folks down at onsemi. onsemi is a leading semiconductor company, and their East Greenwich facility is where John is based and is the senior facilities representative. Is that correct, John?
Yes.
So he's going to share some of his company's experience about going green to save green. So the last person to introduce, I guess, is Polaris MEP. And for those of you who haven't worked with us yet, like I said, Polaris MEP's sole mission is to help small and medium-sized manufacturers improve, grow, stay profitable, and we focus exclusively on Rhode Island. We do have a network of MEPs across the United States, but we work together to make sure that we're keeping America's manufacturing sector strong. And we're measured actually by the impacts. You can see some of the impacts by which we're judged. Today, we'll be focusing really on investments and also on savings, specifically the investments that you can make in energy savings and how that will help your company in the long term. So enough from me. Claire and John, can you take it away?
Yes, thank you so much, Erin, and thanks to Polaris for making this all possible. I'm Claire Kokoska with Rise Engineering. To give a little bit of background about who we are, we started in Rhode Island as a small engineering firm in 1978. We're still based in Rhode Island 40 plus years later. And what we do is whatever engineering needs you have, we can do the consultation with you, figure it out what it is that you need for your buildings and facilities, design the actual projects themselves, implement, install, and then help you with the ongoing maintenance and servicing of those projects. And specifically, what kinds of projects do? We do renewable energy projects and electrification projects. We do all manner of HVAC projects, so heating, cooling, and ventilation. Also includes insulation, which we'll get to in a few minutes, and weatherization and energy efficiency. There's a bit of overlap with all three of those, but we'll get into more detail in just a moment. So that's Rise. And as Erin mentioned, we work with municipalities, school districts, businesses all over Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Primarily, we are the pre-approved vendor for Rhode Island utilities, Massachusetts utilities, and so we've worked with hundreds and thousands of entities across the states. Now, in terms of energy upgrades, your facilities, manufacturing has been through a lot in the last couple of years. With the pandemic, I know that your priorities were just to keep things moving, keep your staff on staff, keep things comfortable within your facilities, just enough to, like I said, keep your production going after that challenging couple of years. And now that we're coming out of it, we get to see the results of long supply chain delays and electricity prices rising, gas prices that are quite high as well. So there's a lot on your plate right now. In addition to all of those concerns, we know that manufacturing and other businesses in the industrial sphere have deferred maintenance issues where their priorities were on just keeping the lights on and keeping production at a certain level, but your facilities may be in need of some upgrades to prevent costly maintenance and staff time to repair old equipment, and just make sure that your facilities are working more efficiently to begin with in terms of energy use and just being updated. So there's a number of different energy upgrade types, and we'll touch on each one of these quickly. When you do a comprehensive energy upgrades project, that means that you look at your building facility as a whole and all of your existing systems and see, okay, what existing systems do I have that are older and in need of upgrade? Where are my facilities causing some pain points? You might have equipment that's, like I said, very costly to keep maintaining, even though it's a little bit older. You may have buildings that are leaking warm air in the summer, or warm air in the winter and cool air in the summer because the building envelope is leaky. And you may be just curious about new technologies like solar and energy storage as an option for your facilities. So in the coming few minutes, we'll talk about solar, energy storage, heating and cooling, insulation, lighting, ventilation, EV charging, and building controls. And I keep turnkey here because one of the important things to keep in mind is that as you're upgrading your facilities for long-term cost reduction, long-term energy reduction, and long-term just resilience of your facilities, period, it's best to do these projects all at once, or as many as you can at a time, so that you're not wasting time doing projects in a piecemeal way. If you're able to have more than one project done at a time or more than one upgrade done at a time, that's always just more cost effective for you. And then after we go through each of these, as Erin said, we'll go through a couple of funding mechanisms too to make these possible. So insulation, I'm sure you're all aware of it. It's not the hottest topic out there, but it's one of the most important things you can do to make your buildings and your manufacturing facilities more efficient, whether it's an actual production line or a warehouse or offices for your manufacturing firms. Insulation is so critical because it keeps your building from leaking out energy, wasting energy from overly heating or overly cooling a building and then having that temperature just get sucked out through leaking windows or uncaulked doors. And I know many of you have attic spaces or second floors where that temperature is just leaking through the building. So if you can, what it's called, seal your building envelope, that can save up to 20% on heating and cooling costs, 10% on energy costs overall. And another important thing is that it just improves your staff comfort and occupant comfort within the building, and whatever equipment you might have. I know that it's critical to keep those at a certain temperature and keep the environment to a specific degree or temperature range. So it's also important for your production lines. And a couple of things you can do are air sealing and duct insulation, the little blankets you see around your pipes and your ductwork. The next I won't say it's the next most important, but the next simplest upgrade to do, which many of you may have done already, is upgrading your lighting. So less efficient lighting includes CFL bulbs and incandescent bulbs. And right now, the rebate to replace your lighting is fantastic. Oftentimes, you won't even have to pay out of pocket. It will just be cost neutral to replace your lighting through utility programs. Replacing your current bulbs with LED lights means that you have a very quick payback period for those upgrades. LEDs last about 25 times longer than traditional lights in most cases. And LEDs also use 75% less energy than traditional bulbs. So already lighting upgrades can save our clients tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, depending on how large the facilities are. And also, upgraded lighting doesn't emit heat the same way that traditional lights do, meaning that if you have cold operations in your manufacturing plants, the new upgraded lighting won't emit heat and it won't impact your production systems in quite the same way as a heat emitting light will. Now, I will say that heating and cooling is the next most important upgrade if you haven't done these upgrades already. So heating and cooling upgrades include heat pumps, which is air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps. And we can talk more about that in the Q&A session at the end. Ductless mini splits, high efficiency boilers and high efficiency chillers, and cogeneration units, also known as combined heat and power units. Heating and cooling upgrades can lower your energy use by half, depending on what kinds of technology you currently have in your building. A lot of old boilers or chillers or heating and cooling equipment tend to be 10, 15 years old. And that kind of equipment can be very cost heavy in terms of maintaining those systems. It can cost a lot of staff time trying to maintain those older systems, and they're just not efficient and they use a lot of energy. So as soon as you can replace those heating and cooling systems, the better. And not only can it save 50% on electric heating, but it can also save about 10% on costs if you're replacing gas furnace heating system. And then overall, we tend to see 10 to 30% savings on our energy costs per year. And that may very well go up, that savings rate, because of the new incentives available for these kinds of heating and cooling upgrades, and because of rising electricity costs that we've seen in the last year. Ventilation is another very important upgrade that you can do in your buildings. Because of the pandemic, there's been a high focus put on indoor air quality, which includes ventilation. Now, ventilation is all about airflow, so variable frequency drives and fans and blowers, purifiers, filters. Those are very important just for regular airflow through a building, but what else that means is that if you have in your facilities, it means that ventilation can help regulate humidity and make it so that your environment isn't too humid or too dry, depending on what kind of environment you need in your facilities. And also improve staff comfort. Quality ventilation it helps prevent staff from having sick days, which is actually proven. So quality ventilation prevents people from getting sick. And it makes your facilities more productive in that way alone, in addition to helping your facilities just, the air quality is better inside. And also, if there's particulate matter in the air, if there's dust, sawdust, any kind of particles in the air, the ventilation can blow that out of it. Because if you have a buildup of that in your systems, it can glom onto whatever equipment you have. And of course, that's just going to make your equipment less effective over time. And I say equipment, I mean production equipment, and whatever else you might have in your facilities. Next is solar, which of course you've heard so much about, I'm sure. And I bet many of you are very curious about solar. And yes, it is a big, it sounds like a big investment, and it is a big change for many of you. So after you've gone through some of those other upgrades, solar is the next best thing to focus on. So you can have it on a rooftop, you can have it be a carport installation, which means that it's installed generally over a parking lot, which is great because it keeps the cars cool and it doesn't necessarily have to be on your roof if you need a roof replacement within a certain number of years. And solar generates clean energy on site, which means that you don't have to buy that energy from the utility, which, as we've already said, is getting more and more expensive by the year. And the payback period, even now, is about 3 to 6 years from what we've seen with our commercial and industrial clients that we've worked with. And given the incentives that are being made available this year, that payback period will probably go down, maybe not to 2 to 5 years, but maybe 3 to 5 years, depending on the kind of financing you get. And after that point, it's just free electricity being generated for you. And it also prevents you from seeing those extreme hikes in electricity. I mean, some of our clients are seeing $8,000 higher electric bills each month, sometimes more than that, but I'm sure many of you are feeling the pain of that now. Building controls is so critical because with building controls, many systems, if they're in older facilities or if they're in facilities where maybe there were other priorities in terms of building upgrades, you might not have a centralized place where you can have on a mobile or a desktop device be able to regulate your building management systems, your electricity flow throughout the building, your HVAC controls and temperature controls in different areas of your facilities, your lighting as well. You can automate all these systems in one easy place. And when you're able to do that in one easy place where you can see all the data coming together, you can monitor it, you can control it from a device that you have, that can reduce energy use by about 30%, depending on the types of building controls that you're putting in. Not just because you can see it on a fun app on a tablet, but because you're able to be so precise about where you want these controls to go, and you're not wasting staff time on going to each and every space and zone of your facility to adjust the temperature or turn on and off the lights. So it really creates so many efficiencies. And also being able to just gather that data means that you can see what's actually going on in your facilities, which gives you the power to create future efficiencies. Maybe you realize, oh, this area, we don't really have that many staff in it. We can lower the temperature a little bit, or we don't actually need to be running the lights or other building controls at this time in this zone. So we'll adjust going forward. Energy storage somewhat goes along with building controls in a sense. A lot of people think that energy storage, which is also known as battery energy storage, many people think that you have to pair it with solar or some kind of renewable energy device, which is not true. It can be standalone by itself. And many people also think that its primary purpose is to be used as a generator in the event the power goes out. That's not necessarily its primary purpose, although it can be really fantastic in the event of a storm. If you do need that backup power, because in a manufacturing facility, the last thing you need is for a storm to blow out your production, and then whether you have a production line going and that electricity loss just shuts down all of your production and causes a backup, that's no good. If you have refrigeration equipment and you need cold storage and all of a sudden the electricity goes out and you can't do that anymore, that's no good. So what a battery really does is it can act as a backup generator. But what the primary use of it is that we're seeing now is in facilities with very high electricity use, especially during peak demand times, which means times of day and of the week when everyone's trying to use electricity. That jumps up your demand electricity charges. So if you notice on your electricity bill, there is a section for demand charges. And depending on when you're using your electricity, those demand charges from the utility can shoot way up because your facility is using electricity at a specific time when it's in high demand, why it's called demand charges. So the battery can provide power to your facility during those times of peak electricity use, so that you don't have to pull that electricity from the utility grid. And when you do that, it prevents the utility from charging you all those extra demand charges during peak electricity time. That's really the primary, one of the primary uses of energy storage that's less well known, and it can save tens of thousands of dollars for some clients a year. It's not right for everyone, but for facilities that do use a lot of electricity at specific times, it's a really great option. And as an aside, I know EV charging might not be a priority of yours, but I'm just throwing it in here because in the coming years, by 2030, which is only how many years from now? 7, half of the cars on the road will be EVs, and it's going to become more and more in demand from employees, from anyone visiting your facility. So now might be a good time to just start considering EV charging. And for some people, if you have an EV charging station, you can use that as a revenue generator because people will pay to use that EV charging station. Now that we're done with talking about each of the individual upgrades you can do, thank you for your patience. We're going to talk about a couple of funding sources and hone in on one big one in particular. The year 2023 that we're in right now, there is more funding for energy projects, energy upgrades than there has ever been before. At the federal level, there is the IRA, which is the Inflation Reduction Act. We'll go through that in more detail in the next slide, but that's going to provide, $369 billion at the federal level for clean energy projects. But for you, that could mean many thousands of dollars for energy upgrades and incentives. At the state level, Rhode Island, through the Office of Energy Resources, has many rebates and incentives and upcoming grant programs to fund some of these projects. At the utility level, Rhode Island Energy also has its own set of rebates and incentives for a number of these projects, both prescriptive and custom, and some other sources of financing. I'm only going to touch briefly on CPACE, which is commercial PACE. So it's a low interest loan that you can apply for so that you can make these energy projects more easy. You can fund it more easily through that low interest payment. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, I just mentioned, it's providing $369 billion at the federal level to filter down to municipalities, schools, businesses, any kind of entity that might be able to benefit from these incentives can and should. It's a lot of money and it's just out there. So I recommend grabbing whatever of it you can. It's going into effect this year, and there are still some things that the IRS and the Secretary of Treasury are working through in terms of guidelines on specifics. But later this year, one of the biggest ones is the clean energy credits for solar and battery energy storage, also wind, but we're not touching on that in that presentation. So there's a 30% investment tax credit, which means if you get a solar system, you get 30% lopped right off of it in the form of a tax credit. And if you don't want to get that 30% off upfront, you can choose to opt for the production tax credit, which is 2.6 cents per kilowatt hour. So whatever energy your clean energy system is generating or providing for you, you can benefit from a 2.6 cent production tax credit. Now, these are going to be huge in simplifying how manufacturing facilities and firms can invest in clean energy for themselves. It'll make it so much easier to procure those systems for your buildings. And then in addition to that, you can also get an additional 10% off for whenever domestic manufacturing, meaning manufacturing of those systems in the US ramps up and you source those systems manufactured in the US. And then there's a further 10% for siting in energy communities. They haven't issued a full definition of what that means yet. It sort of means a fossil fuel dependent community, one that used to have coal plants in it or something. I don't think that's as relevant for Rhode Island. But what is relevant is that if your manufacturing plant is sited in a low income community or municipality, you get an additional 10 to 20% off of that system, off of that 30% investment tax credit, or a 10 to 20% hike in that 2.6 cent production tax credit. So massive, massive, massive incentives and savings for solar and battery storage. Now, I know many of you have your own fleets for your buildings and your facilities. So the commercial clean vehicle credit will also provide a pretty hefty incentive for vehicles that you purchase, whether it's used or new, that are electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids. There's a couple of other technical EVs, but I'm not going to touch on those because we don't really see them in our day-to-day. And that's for smaller vehicles, which look more like the passenger cars that you drive that you might source for your firm, or buses and heavy-duty vehicles, where you can get up to $40,000 off for each vehicle. The alternative fuel refueling property is the incentive off of EV charging stations. So if you're located in a low-income community, you can get up to $100,000 off per EV charging unit, which is particularly why I wanted to mention it as one of the energy upgrades to consider, because now that there's that incentive, especially if you're in a low-income community, now's the time to take advantage of that $100,000 incentive for EV charging unit. The next one that I'll touch, yes.
Before you go on to the next one, Carol had a good question, which is, are electric forklifts considered commercial clean vehicles?
That's a very good question. They're still issuing guidance on that. So I haven't read forklift specifically, but it could be that forklift is within a definition of electric vehicle that is wide enough to include an electric forklift. I can look that up and get back to you, Carol.
Yeah, thank you.
Because you're right, that would be very
curious.
relevant. Mm-hmm.
I was curious. Thank you.
Yeah. And then just to clarify, because I know Carol asked about it, and I also got another message. So these are the national incentives, but there's state incentives as well, like, right, the Office of Energy in Rhode Island,
Right.
Electric RI, I think that's what it's called, or something like that. So
yeah.
you could,
and they're working to replenish that. Exactly. So this you can stack on top of whatever other state or utility or third-party incentives that you're getting as well, which is the beauty of it, because you can take this along with all of the other ones, and then pretty soon those energy upgrades are looking a lot more manageable to actually implement. The last one that I'll cover from the IRA is the commercial buildings energy efficiency tax deduction. That is the magical 179D, and many of you might have heard of that already. It's been in use for some time in other applications, but this is the first time that the federal government has said, we want this tax credit to be applicable for clean energy and energy efficiency upgrades. So interior lighting upgrades, as in LED replacements and so forth. Building envelope, which is insulation upgrades, HVAC and hot water systems. This can all receive this tax deduction. So essentially, if you have a newer existing building and you implement those measures and reduce your energy use in that building between 25 and 50% as a result of those upgrades, you will receive anywhere from $2.50 a square foot off, all the way up to $5 a square foot off, which is a massive, massive incentive. And for manufacturers like you all, that's going to be a huge boon for your energy projects and building upgrades. with that, I'm going to just touch very briefly on some of the other grants and incentives, because some of the other ones, Rhode Island has a number of other ones that are being replenished, like the utility EV program. They are just working through how they want to implement that going forward and how much they want to add to that bucket for EV incentives at the state level. OER rebates, which is the Office of Energy Resources, which is like the Rhode Island Energy Department. They have many, many rebates for prescriptive and custom HVAC and energy efficiency projects. So any of the measures that I mentioned earlier, the OER and utility both have rebates and incentives for that, which we would be able to help you take a look at which ones those are. There's too many to list right now. And one of the next big things that we're looking out for is the Rhode Island High Efficiency Heat Pump Program. Heat pumps are one of the most effective and efficient ways to reduce cost and energy use when heating and cooling your building. So Rhode Island this year is implementing this new program for high efficiency heat pumps. And depending on the type of heat pump you install, it can be $2,500 per ton or $4,500 per ton. And that might not mean a lot, but in any kind of review of a building or review of what heat pump your building might need, that figure would be translated into something that makes sense for your building. So you would find out what that would become in terms of saving an incentive dollar amount for your own building. So now that we have covered the different energy upgrades and in order of importance and priority that I would recommend for you to consider, and some of the benefits of going through with those upgrades, and a few of the different grants, incentives available at the federal, state, utility level, now it's time for our case study. So John was kind enough to join us here and participate as our case study. Rise worked with onsemi to review some potential energy upgrades and went through with them. And so now I'm going to give John the floor to talk about those for just a few minutes. Thank you, John.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Certainly, I want to go on the record saying I'm not an energy specialist. Certainly, rely on you folks with all of that. And yes, case study. Again, a little bit of my background. I've been in manufacturing for just almost 15 years. Back in 1990, a company in Rhode Island, I'm sure probably you've heard of Cherry Semiconductor, and then they were acquired by On Semiconductor. And recently we've gone through a rebranding to really, change the mission statement, how we want to reduce our carbon footprint, which I'm sure everybody there is under the same pressure. Again, that's what we need to do, right? Save the planet, right? Reduce, global warming. So back in 2020, we started looking at this with other, companies out there calling themselves, energy efficient programs and, companies. So, we looked at options. A lot of the challenges were exactly what would be best fit. It's really based on what the company was willing to provide. Line voltage, LED lamps, retrofits, et cetera, minimal controls. So going back and forth, ROI was, 5 to 8 to 10 years. It was just unachievable. On semi, we don't even want to look at anything if it's greater than 2 years, more or less as a guideline. So, so back the early 2020, I ended up connecting up with a lighting efficient specialist, and just talking with her, going through all the options on what we had, which was the fluorescent. We had T8s. We've already changed those a couple times. The most recent was an energy efficient ballast. So we definitely saw some savings there. But with the new technologies in LED today, I couldn't help but at least see if there's a chance we could bring that into the building. We have the office space, technical labs, and they're all parabolic. So we looked at all of those, looked at options of controls, cable wire switches, which is something we wanted to do. But with the technologies of LED that was introduced through RISE, just overwhelmed with the change in controls that they offered, along with spectrum lighting, the lumen output. It was beyond what I imagined. Of course, reducing the maintenance of end of life, relamping, etc. It would all go away. So we ended up looking at their quotation, reviewed it, and probably went back and forth with a couple options of what we could do to continue to minimize that. And when I found out that at the very end they could introduce a on-bill refinancing, I was totally amazed. And so with the quote, with the cost of not doing anything, and with the on-bill refinancing, I mean, in my mind, it was a no-brainer. It would be funded through the utility company. We would get all the work done, start to take advantage of the savings at the time. And once the project was signed off and completed, then we can start adding a line item to pay for that. And that cost was the amount of money that was expected to be reduced in the electric bill anyway. So presented to corporate. I think it was just over 3 years, but based on the what they offered on the on-bill refinancing, they agreed. We went through it. So parts ordered Q4 of 2021, and we were going to commence the installation the 1st of 2022, and honestly, it went very well. We had over 600 fixtures that we selected based on which pretty much made sense on which fixtures we could reduce, that are used every day, during the occupied times. Again, brought in some control measures. We certainly took advantage of the daylight harvesting on all of the perimeter offices with the windows, cafeterias, and again, based on the control theme lighting and conference rooms. And we had several labs that are lit up. The whole lab is lit up, and they're only working in 1/4 of that facility, that lab space. So with the new controls on Bluetooth, theme setting, it allowed us to selectively select groups within that one area to come on based on occupancy sensing. Basically, we bypass all existing sensors. So these fixtures run 24/7, and you program them what to do if they sense occupancy. So that again, that was a tremendous, taking advantage of the technology of what they have to offer. Fixtures, so the complete installation was done, I think overall, probably within 3 months. I think it was intended for 2, but we had a couple issues and changes. I think also based on the electrical staff and vacations, etc. But I'll tell you, one of the advantages I realized was they truly are a turnkey servicing company right to the end. Even today, we've had some issues.
I fear John froze. See if we can get him back. So I think that it sounded like John was saying that you guys actually helped them also apply for the incentives, not just pick out what the funding was, but
yeah.
John, you just, I'm afraid. You froze.
I'm sorry?
You were saying that you'd had a few issues.
Oh, okay. So yeah, we had a few issues as far as scheduling. Or as far as hardware failure, which is a very small percentage. The lighting fixtures we did choose to have installed was the Lightronics, and that was it was a basket troffers, 2x2, 2x4. Again, great selection, great quality fixture. So fast forward 2023, just want to go back and take a look to see what, what the real savings that we did see. It was projected to let's see, as far as the reduction, kWh was around 80, just under 86,000 kWh. So we see that we were averaging approximately 13,000 kWh per month, totaling 157. So we've certainly exceeded that. Not to say that it's all from lighting, because, like Claire had mentioned too, that, there's a lot of the byproduct of reducing the heat, therefore the energy for cooling, et cetera. So, and we've also made changes. We've, one of the other utility consumers we have is air compressors and dryers. It's, tremendous impact on our utility along with our mechanical cooling. So, overall, I'm very happy with the kWh reduction. Unfortunately, as you all know, we've seen a major impact or increase on our utility costs. So, that continued to rise and exceed, previous years, 21 and 22. So that'll be another topic for me to get resolved. But again, what I was expected to achieve, I certainly have, and I could only imagine if we had not done that, the additional cost it would have been because of the ridiculous cost per kWh. And again, I'm really looking forward to continue to work with them. I'm also I currently are reviewing as far as developing a DDC control, like Claire mentioned, as far as controls. We have a lot of independent HVAC units running. I need to really better control that, along with, they talk about economizers. I mean, in New England, that's a major cost savings. So, and like they say, there's usually probably 20% of economizers that fail throughout the year. So, I'd love to try to get a handle on that as well. And being short-staffed, which is what, we're all trying to do. Again, I support manufacturing. These facilities are business units. So we try to do it with, minimum overhead, and then utilize contractors when needed. So, but in closing, I totally feel that, RISE has fulfilled the need that I needed to aid us to find energy reduction. And again, not just the lighting, but in future projects coming. So.
Thank you so much, John. I know our whole team has loved working with you and to continue working with you. And as Aaron was saying just before, or while we were waiting for your audio to come back, yes, we do a free upfront energy audit, and just giving us a sense of what your facilities might need and what we might recommend for the greatest cost savings and long-term resilience and effectiveness of your facilities. And then we identify the grants, incentives, rebates out there and apply those, whether that's applying for a grant itself or just making sure that we get those incentives applied to that specific energy measure that we're upgrading. And then we can do the ongoing servicing as well. But it was such a pleasure working with onsemi, I know. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. And I just want to personally thank all of you so much for joining us, and John for telling your story. And I have my contact information here. I'm happy to chat with any of you. And Aaron, I will let you take it from here for the question and answer.
Yeah, no, this was great. Thank you, John. And you immediately addressed a couple of the questions that had come in by chat, which were, are there resources available to help you apply for the incentives? And obviously RISE helps you do that and also prioritize, because there's a lot out there. And I also really appreciated that you talked about kind of the fact that you did a pilot first, basically. I mean, not really a pilot, but you focused on one thing, lighting, and you did the one thing to see the ROI before you go on to the next thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because that was one of the questions that I had gotten was, we've been getting pushback from our company owner. We're strapped for people. How much staff does it take for something like this? And definitely in Rhode Island, most of our manufacturers are small manufacturers of under 20 people. So can you speak a little bit to how much resources you needed internally to pull this off? 600 lights is a lot.
It actually is, coming from manufacturing staff, well over 30. So I'm actually the last facility guy standing, which again, the need for that for a business unit. It was a corporate decision and basically utilized resources, contractors. So I pretty much supported, being licensed in the electrical field. So it certainly allowed me to probably do a little more than than what most people can. But CAD drawings, floor plans, just to really identify what we wanted to do. I was able to provide all that on the meetings. But as far as the electrical staff, I mean, they certainly provide all of that and really responsible for most of it, or all of it, shall I say. And then even lighting modifications, we had 1x4s, didn't make sense. So, working with them, we were able to creatively change that, smaller fixtures, whatever made sense based on that space. So, it was great working with them, and they provided all the resources necessary.
Excellent. Thank you. And I know that from Polaris MEP side, the way we've supported projects like this, for example, is for companies that maybe don't have like CAD floor plans and they don't have updated things and, kind of all the rest. That's where our team has come in and either using a 3D modeling system, and measurement system, created the CAD that then, wonderful partners like Rise could work from to make sure that they were assessing correctly, or helped with, even sometimes this, I assume, right? Some things got moved around, correct? So
Exactly.
understanding how to make sure you're not interrupting the process flow while you're both installing and then have that final setup. So those are some of the things we've done. Carol, you had asked about solar incentives specifically in Rhode Island and installing EV charging in Rhode Island. I remember the name of the thing. It's called Electrify RI, but it seems clear, right? There's also some emphasis on solar right now in the state.
There is, and at the state level, Rhode Island has a couple of different programs. One of them is REG, one of them is REF. Depending on which of those programs you choose, it's sort of like the investment tax credit versus the production tax credit through the IRA, where you can choose to join one program and get your incentive up front, or you can choose the other program, REF, where you can opt to get a certain incentive per kilowatt hour on an ongoing basis. I think it depends on your type of project, but that incentive can go for 10, 15, 20 years, depending on how you apply for the program. So Rhode Island does have good existing solar programs, and that can be stacked on top of the federal incentives as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And I'm happy to offline talk more in detail about each of those programs. And if you're considering solar, just specifically what else you might consider. I also see in the chat, Patrick Griffin from the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce reminded us about the ventilation initiative. Thank you so much for that, Patrick. It's a really fantastic grant program where different associations and groups around Rhode Island, like the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce, have applied and gotten this grant funding from the state, where they can provide grants of, I believe it's 10, or is it up to 28,000, or I believe it's just 10,000 for ventilation upgrades. If you apply through these organizations, like the one that Patrick is a part of. So the one thing about that is thank you, up to $10,000 for the ventilation upgrades through that grant program. The thing about that is there is currently a cap on organizations and entities that can apply for that. You can't have a gross revenue of $1 million or more, from what I understand. So I know people are pushing back on that, so we'll see if they change it. But it's a really, really fabulous program.
Yeah, and again, I think that's why it's important to partner with somebody like RISE. And again, you know, Polaris MEP, our job is to be the resource and connect you to other resources that can, you know, solve it. There are things that we can definitely help y'all with, like the layout and the sourcing. I was thrilled to see that some of the credits are specifically if you buy domestically made, you know, equipment. Well, you know, that's definitely something that we all do. So having somebody like Claire to guide you through, yes, this is an incentive program, but there's a cap, so it wouldn't apply. So do look over here, I think is critical. Hey, John just asked a question about solar. Thanks, John.
Yeah. So just to read his question aloud, it essentially says, John's company onsemi received a solar proposal from RISE, but the onsemi corporate office wasn't quite on board with the overall carbon footprint reduction. So let's see, I believe due to how these panels are manufactured, anything you could share with this? A couple of thoughts there. One of them being that, and I haven't personally seen that solar, my colleague was working on that solar proposal, but sometimes certain roofs can only accommodate a certain amount of solar capacity. If you're doing it on a rooftop or if you're doing carport or ground mount, whatever type of solar it is that you're installing, and typically it's rooftop, there are rules about the spacing between the edge line of the roof and the solar panel itself for fire safety reasons. And depending on what types of rooftop units you have or rooftop cooling equipment or fans you might have on the roof or the sloping of it and the orientation, your roof may only be able to support not a full percentage of what we might want you to have on the roof. And it's just a matter of the roof itself being the barrier to that. But as far as the solar panels themselves, I don't know which ones were proposed. I think that in the coming years, when United States manufacturers begin to ramp up their domestic manufacturing of solar panels, that will greatly reduce the carbon footprint of solar panel manufacturing because it's not produced in China or Korea or overseas and then shipped over to the States. You eliminate that entire shipping carbon emission. And one last thought I do have is that there is a question right now about what will happen to solar panels after they reach their end of life. And solar panels can typically last 20 years, but they can last longer than that. I mean, there's panels that go closer to 30 years and some that have gone even beyond that. But typically we say their highest performance will be from 0 to 20 years of their lifespan. So after that point, there's a question about what will happen after they reach that end of life and how to recycle those alloys and precious metals within the panel themselves. And that's still a question that we're working through. So right now, the priority, I think, is more to make sure that we're limiting our fossil fuel generation, and in time, and with some tinkering, we will come up with a way in the next 20 years to figure out an effective way of recycling and disposing of those solar panels that have reached their end of life. So it's not an answer, but it's the approach that's been taken.
I definitely appreciate, Claire, you know, bringing it back to what you said at the beginning. Technologies have really changed. Even you, John, right? You had done some lighting changes, and then you said a couple of years later, well, we got some savings, but let's look at what we've got now with technologies. These technologies are going to be rapidly changing, and I'm excited to see where we can go as an industry in Rhode Island to kind of leverage the resources that are out there and help through. I know we are coming up on our time. If folks have additional questions that they haven't answered, please send them our way. You can count on the fact that there's going to be an email coming from me, and it's going to have a little feedback survey to make sure that we put this event together in a way that answered your questions and hit your needs. We are a continuous improvement organization at Polaris MEP, so therefore help us continually improve these programs. I want to thank John for sharing his experiences and kind of the way he approached it, because I know that really resonated with me. And Claire for explaining how many different possible ways there are to attack the challenge of energy savings and come out with those outcomes that really help you on that triple bottom line. So really appreciate that. Again, look for my email and please let us know if you have any additional questions. It's been our privilege to host John and Claire and all of you today to talk about energy savings. Thank you.
Again, thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.